Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final briefings for the summer policy workshop in the Environmental Science and Policy program here at Columbia SEPA. My name is Matt Palmer. I'm one of the faculty that teach the class. I'll be filling in for Professor Steve Cohen today, who unfortunately had a death in the family, so can't attend. By way of introduction, of course, most of the audience here are the students in the program, but we have some guests, guest faculty, and guest students, and some people, and the proceedings today will be videotaped, so we'll be having people watching this online as well. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the course, which is a management simulation where 5 teams of students each work with an individual advisor to analyze a piece of environmental legislation. And the emphasis here in the summer semester is to study the science associated with that environmental problem and the science associated with the solution to that problem. So these groups of 9 or 10 students have been working with individual faculty throughout the summer to produce a series of oral briefings and written memos, and all of that culminates in what we're going to see this morning, which is the final presentation addressing, again, the science of a series of environmental problems and their solution. These briefings will be 10 minutes long, followed with an individual Q&A, and then we will take a brief break after each one. I'll close the morning with some final comments about placing this in the greater context for both the workshop course and the whole curriculum. Without further ado, let's get started with our first briefer, who is from Professor Cohen's group, the Get the Lead Out Act of 2016.
Good morning. My name is Isaac Wilkins. I'll be representing the Get the Lead Out Act group of 2016. And I first want to, thank my colleagues for their countless efforts in making this presentation possible. I also want to thank Professor Cohen, who unfortunately, as Professor Palmer said, couldn't be here today, but for his guidance and assistance in also making this presentation possible. So what we'll be talking about today is basically, I want to give you a general overview. We'll be talking about the Get the Lead Out Act of 2016. We'll talk about the lead problem. We'll talk about the sources of lead exposure, what the health effects of lead exposure, some solutions that we've proposed based off of the $60 million which the bill allocates. And we'll also talk about, education potential for, lead risk exposure, as well as come up with measures of how to test the success of the bill. So I want to draw your attention to this lovely little girl in the corner. This right here is my friend Chrissy. And Chrissy, she's 6 years old. She's from a low-income family in Flint, Michigan. And 2 weeks ago, she came in for her annual lead level screenings. And unfortunately, the results came back this week, and she tested for 15 micrograms per deciliters of lead. And if you know anything about lead poisoning, that's 5 micrograms per deciliter higher than that of the EPA level. So Chrissy is my motivation for today. So let's talk a little bit about the purpose of the Get the Lead Out Act of 2016. The act seeks to provide financial assistance through educational grants and lead replacement grants to low-income population. And essentially, with lead being present in the water, it causes a variety of adverse health effects, and they're disproportionately affecting low-income families and children. But before we dive into the issue, I want to give you a background of how lead has become present. Lead has been present since ancient times, from the Romans and the aqueducts to cosmetic uses and present in lead paint. And it wasn't a key point in 1922. The League of Nations actually banned lead usage for consumer usage. However, the United States we actually reached our peak in 1922. And it wasn't until 1977 that lead usage, or the consumer usage of lead, was banned in the United States. And if you take a look at this map in the right-hand corner, all of those red indicators are lead violations in drinking water systems. And essentially, you can see that lead in drinking water, or lead, is still a problem in America. So recognizing that, we got to talk about what are the sources of exposure in lead. And I want to first talk about the dermal layer, which is your skin. So basically, one can be exposed to lead through, taking a shower, which I hope everybody does, and, washing your hands and things of that nature. or also through orally, so through drinking water or through cooking food. That's or means that one can be exposed to lead. And essentially what happens is you have these old infrastructures that use lead solder, which were in homes that were built before 1977, and they basically react with treated water, and they cause corrosion in the pipes that were built before 1977, and essentially these lead residues dissipate out into the water supply, thus you having lead in drinking water. And basically, from being exposed to lead, it causes a variety of adverse health effects. So as you can see in the adult, it affects the major 7 body systems. You have, memory loss issues, kidney failures, neuropathy issues, and things of that nature. But I want you to, let's bring back Chrissy for a second. Now, I want you to take a look at this. The major thing I want you to know about the kids is that the lead basically affects children more so than that of adults. And let's focus on the brain. Our brain that's our golden nugget, that's everything. And unfortunately, if children have high concentrations of lead, it kind of breaks down the blood-brain barrier and basically causes cognitive development issues in that of children. And unfortunately for Chrissy, because she had 15 micrograms per deciliter, she is at high risk for slow cognitive development, which can mean a variety of different issues, meaning more money spent on tutors or educational disparity issues, so things of that nature. So the health effects for blood lead levels is a serious deal. Which brings me to the Get the Lead Out Act of 2016. This bill aims to reduce lead in water through a variety of different measures, such as corrosion control, education, lead service line replacement, and basically it will be available to community and non-community water systems. It provides cost sharing and financial system to low-income public and private entities. And here, right, it's just basically a mechanism that shows, the public main water streams and then the private main water streams. So the bill allocates $60 million. And essentially, I just want to point out that is not enough money to deal with this lead issue. It's not enough. However, my group, we devised a mechanism that basically will, get you more bang for your buck. And I want to start, it breaks it down into education and infrastructure. So the first $3 to $5 million will be allocated towards educational grants. And then the $55 to $57 million will be allocated towards infrastructure grants, things like planning grants and startup grants. And I'm going to actually talk about the specifics with the need for planning grants in the next slide. So planning grants. So basically, these planning grants are responsible for basically making sure that people have working knowledge of their issue. So that means doing a cost analysis of lead and what it takes, to do lead replacement. That also means, to actually assess the problem, understand the adverse health effects that is coming from, understand the difference between a private water source and a public water source, as well as demonstrate a degree of need, urgency, and plans for remediation. And I want to talk about the other section of the grants. So we talked about infrastructure. Now we're going to talk about the educational grants, which is a key part. So I wanted you to focus on who, what, and how. So the who is who to teach. And as I stated before, we're teaching low-income families and vulnerable children at risk. The what, which is what to teach, we're teaching them preventative solutions. So that means, when you wake up in the morning, I'm not saying run it for a long time, but for a few seconds, turn on your faucet and make sure that you've got the possibility of any lead residues that, are circulating in your pipes. Make sure that it's spelled out. And also it means, when you talk about what to teach, you need to teach them about the adverse health effects and means of exposure as I presented in the previous slides. And then how, which is how to outreach. So we live in the 21st century. Everybody's always on their phone. We have things such as Twitter or Instagram. And for, the older generation, or for those that still use newspapers, we can put in, little articles and ads to basically make sure that we're educating people about this severe issue. So ultimately, after, giving out the infrastructure grant and giving out the educational grants and, the bill is rolling, we have to measure the success of the Get the Lead Out Act of 2016. And that's actually a common issue that is, flawed with a lot of these bills or programs, is that they don't touch the success. But with my team, we've come up with a mechanism or a series of ways of how to basically test the success of our bill. So we have things such as blood tests, water tests, lead awareness, and behavioral change surveys. So for example, for blood tests, there's this thing called the Lead Care 2 Toolkit, and essentially it's similar to a diabetic machine, and basically that, through a single finger prick, and putting it on the little strip indicator, you'll see how much lead concentrations are in your blood. And what's so cool about the packet is that basically it provides pamphlets and surveys, or not surveys, I'm sorry. It provides pamphlets and additional information to show you outlets and steps to take if you have high lead concentrations. And then I also want to talk about the behavioral change surveys. So basically what the behavioral change survey consists of is through a variety of reaching out outlets you have through emails or telephone calls or even on websites. You can actually ask people, have your routines changed, have your behavior changed after becoming aware about lead? So I'll ask questions like, do you schedule regularly, annual or annually water tests? Do you schedule regular blood test screenings and things of that nature? Ultimately, it is our hope that, after doing all of these different measures, that we've made one step closer to dealing with this or solving this lead issue that's prevalent in America. So I want to, let's reel everything back in together. So after we've talked about, the history of lead, after we talk about the exposure pathways, after we talked about the adverse health effects that are associated with lead, and I've given you a breakdown of the bill and essentially how my group have basically come up with a mechanism to best manage the small funds that we do have, I hope that you understand the severity of this lead issue. I hope that you understand the responsibility that we all have to Chrissy's and other alikes. And if you don't take away, anything from this presentation, I want you to take away two things. One is that there is no safe lead level for anyone. And two, I believe we have a moral obligation to helping eradicate this major lead issue in America. Thank you very much.
And I'm just going to speak up very loudly because I wanted to know whether elementary schools are a place for that testing and intervention in your plan, or would it be through some other avenue to reach those children to see whether they have a lead problem?
Well, there are current mechanisms or outlets in place that actually use education grants through schools to educate them, but this would primarily focus on the homes. A lot of times the message doesn't get back home, and if the parents are educated about it, then we hope that they will solve the issue. Am I calling? Okay.
Thanks, Isaac. So I guess my question is specifically on your act itself. Now, you talked about monitoring safe lead levels. And there's some other acts like the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act that have specific mandates for maintaining chemicals or substances like lead. My question is, why is this different than those acts, particularly in relation to lead?
Say the last part again, please.
Right. So my question is, why is this particular act different from the other legislation involving lead in water?
Well, as you stated, there are a lot of different acts out there, but this sort of serves as it's like a seed grant or a seed act that basically pushes people, to address the lead issue, because this $60 million or this act is not going to solve the entire issue. So I guess in a way it's similar to those grants or those acts that you spoke about. Here's the mic.
Hi there. Thanks very much for that. That was very informative. You answered one of my questions. The one thing I'm surprised by, though, I grew up in the 70s, as a kid, and I remember seeing, commercials for little kids in the inner city eating lead paint, and I thought this was something that we were kind of behind. I thought Flint was sort of an outlier. Is a lot of the infrastructure, was it grandfathered? Is that why we still have so much lead in the infrastructure, so to speak?
Well, to my knowledge, it's not grandfathered. It's just poor action on municipalities and state levels. It's also present in D.C. In 2004, they had a whole lead crisis that it was present in lead solder, and actually currently they still have a lot of homes that have this lead solder. And what they did was they replaced the public lines, but they put it up to the the residents to replace these private lines. And a lot of people, as you can see, is affecting low-income people. And these installations cost around $3,000. So for an annual person that's below the poverty line, that's just not a necessity, or they don't have the funds to do that.
Thank you, Isaac. Wonderful presentation. I'm curious as to how priority might be established as to where the money goes.
Well, the way the bill is written, and I think I kind of hinted at it a little bit, we came up with a mechanism that we think would best get the usage of the $16 million that's allocated. However, it's ultimately up to the administrator of the certain municipality or the state that gets the grant. That's how the bill works. So it's not the best bill, but it's a bill nonetheless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.